People paying money to see me in a 20x20 ring.
Doesn't it? Fuck. Yeah. I don't know. I don't understand why the Warrior did half the shit he did. I'll never forget though. Growing up, I don't know if you guys remember this, but he had he didn't get in trouble, or he got in trouble like late after, like way after the fact. But he was, what he was doing was basically taking people's money, because he was too busy being the Warrior and not fulfilling what he was promising. And he had this like you would send away for this fucking Ultimate Warrior, like fucking Warrior's kit or some shit, and it was like, it came with like protein and like armbands and like a few weights, and like you were supposed to be able to like work out, like, almost like what DDP yoga is now, but like way back, a very fucking simple and, you know, just not well put together deal. And he was charging like $100-$200 a pop, and apparently people were sending him money. And then what he would do was, like, because he couldn't keep up with the schedule of his own business, because he was too busy working for WWF, he was just like basically getting all this money in the mail for free. And then instead of making good on all the promises of like, hey, 60 people ordered, I gotta send out 60 orders, he just kept the money. And he would send off like packages that were either half-assed or whatever. I don't know if you guys remember that or not, but that was a big deal back in the day.
No, I do not remember that. Holy fuck. If that were to happen nowadays, he would be sued immediately.
Oh, yeah.
He would definitely not be working along with Amazon.
No, not at all.
I don't know, I guess the Warrior for me is just one of those childhood things. Like Hogan's like, yeah, I know he's a douchebag, but there's a special spot in my heart that, like, when you see him come out in that crazy entrance music, you can't help but get pumped. Yeah. And it's like, no matter how stupid, and you look at it now, you're like, yeah, this is kind of stupid, but it's like, you had this sense of security, like, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
The Warrior's here.
Wait, I was talking to him about that last week, and because he didn't grow up with that Hulk Hogan. We did.
Yes.
He didn't, you know, and like, I can only explain it so much because a lot of it was just like a perfect storm of things happening. You know, you had Hulk Hogan, the real American hero, and that was a huge deal back then. But, like, not to read too much into it, like, they played off of the Cold War with Russia, and you had you know, heel wrestlers who were Russian, and that they got big pops because they were the fucking commies, and they were, you know. And not that Hogan was, like, strictly against Russian wrestlers, but Hogan made you believe. Hogan made you believe that no matter what came his way, he was able to defeat it. They weren't squash matches. He came out, he gave him every opportunity to beat him down, and then he would fucking Hulk back up, and boom, he's the winner. He's the champ, you know?
Yeah, definitely for me. No matter who the Hulkster fought, I mean, I loved Hulkster, loved Warrior, loved Macho. But no matter who Hogan faced, it was hard for me to cheer for Macho. It was hard for me to cheer for Warrior because Hogan was always my guy. And it was just really weird. It was hard.
As big as
for a kid.
As big as Mach was, though, I felt the same way. Like, he was never up there like Hulk was.
Right.
He just wasn't. No matter how much they pushed him, he just wasn't Hulk Hogan. And quite honestly, if we're talking about like 80s wrestling, 80s WWF, you don't get any bigger than Hulk Hogan. I don't care, give a fuck who you are. And that's just, he was up on that level. He was on that pedestal. And there was no way you were knocking him off. Even when he wasn't champ.
You're right.
Even when he wasn't champ, you couldn't go out there and be like, oh, he's bigger than Hulk now. No, that just didn't happen. It just didn't fucking happen.
And looking back now, being older and wiser, obviously Macho was a way better worker than, Hogan or the Warrior.
Oh, yeah, good God.
But I, didn't realize that until I grew up. And I don't mean 5 minutes ago.
All right, so I guess we'll go around. We'll start with you. What got you into wrestling?
Are we on now?
Yeah, we're on now.
Okay.
What got you into wrestling? Why did you start watching wrestling?
I love to answer this question. It takes me back. I can remember right now. Saturday night's main event is what I really think started, and definitely the Saturday morning, Superstars, and then Challenge was on Sundays. My dad. I was watching with my dad. I remember Saturday night's main event was in place of Saturday Night Live, one Saturday night out of the month. And I would stay up with my dad, and we would eat mush-up cookies. And for those of you who don't know what mush-up cookies are, they were Chips Ahoy that used to be awesome. With a glass of milk, you dump them in there, and you mush them over the spoon, and you just eat it. That was mush-up cookies. The best, dude. Anyway, watching it with my dad and being able to stay up late and just seeing these, just seeing that, it's like, wow, and seeing the Hulkster, and just, there's a lot of special wrestlers that I love. The Hitman, I can go on forever. Then they all have special places, but like we said earlier, the Hulkster will always be number one for me, even though I don't look at it the same as when I was a child as much. So, yeah, there's my answer.
Now, that's why you started watching it. Why did you, if you could nail it down to one match, what was the match that solidified, I definitely have to watch more of this?
Put him on the spot already. That's a tough one.
It's really hard to remember this because I was such a little dude. Because I always saw things in different order. We used to go to the video store a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Starship Video.
Yep, Starship Video.
And I would just rent any wrestling I could. And there'd be times where I'd rent the same tape, a couple trips in a row. Yeah. But the suspense was always there. Like I was going to get a different result out of a match.
That's how
some of the magic of being a child, I guess. I can't say I remember a match that did it for me. It might pop back in a few minutes. But getting back to watching it with my dad getting me into it, and then my little brother getting into it with me. Going to live events at the Rosemont Horizon. And back then they were all house shows. Just seeing, I know this has been answered like this a million times, but larger than life, heroes.
Yeah, oh yeah, shit. The first time I never got to see Andre live, but seeing Big Show when we were at a house show,
at
an event, I don't even know if it was a house show, but seeing that big motherfucker, it was just like, wow, it's very surreal.
It doesn't really matter for a guy like Big Show. I saw him at a house show, I want to say 3-4 years ago, and I'm at this point in my mid-20s, and I still feel like an ant just being, I was probably maybe 30 yards away from him, and just seeing that man walk down, and everything over the size, just everything about him, it's mind-boggling how somebody like him that larger in life, does what he does, and then watching him at a younger age and seeing what he was able to do, especially, I mean, he's older now and body's caught up with him, but this, what he was able to do is one of the most underrated performers I think we've seen in this generation, because man, it doesn't matter if you're a little kid or if you're an adult like myself. Seeing him live is something that you'll never forget.
Do you remember when he was in WCW and he was just the Giant and he fucking like periodically he would get up and do like fucking like missile drop kicks off the top rope, like holy fuck. I
mean, he also wasn't like 500 pounds then, but he was still huge.
He was still
huge. And yeah, it was crazy. I've always had a huge respect with guys of that size, whether you're 7'2" or whatever. But when you can get on the rope, like if you're Vader or Bam Bam Bigelow, and you have the balls to do what they do, and not only that, the ability to do it is unbelievable. I've always found that amazing. So that's one thing that I think a lot of people now forget about Big Show, is that they look at him now and it's like, who cares? Which I can see that in as far as storyline purposes, but let's not forget what this man was able to do.
True.
Back in the day. But
True.
Yeah, it's an unreal experience anytime you can see him live.
While you're talking, what got you started with wrestling?
Well, I think, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I want to say that I'm part of the last generation of channel surfing. Before we had boxes that told you what was on, you can go pick up from a menu. You had to flip a screen. I mean, you had the TV Guide channel, but if you weren't patient like me, you weren't going to wait for it to rotate through. So I'm just flipping channels, and I see this massive man running through somebody verbally on a microphone, being interviewed by some old guy who's balding with a really thick mustache by the name of Mean Gene Okerlund. He was actually had no hair at this time, but he had like the little circle around his head.
Toilet seat haircut.
Toilet seat haircut. Yeah, there it is. And then the man said, "Can you dig it, sucker?" And I was like, I don't know if I can, but I want to keep watching to find out if I can. Booker T was my gateway to wrestling, in the sense that Metallica was my gateway to metal. And as soon as, and I use that story, that saying, because I have the exact same storyline where I was so excited about what I saw, and I went to school the next day, and I told her, I was like, "Hey, you know about this thing called wrestling? Like it's this brand new thing that I discovered."
I thought you were gonna tell me you were calling everybody suckers.
I probably was. I don't know. I was like 6 or 7 at the time, and they're like, "Yeah," and they're telling me about this other promotion called WWF, and so I was like, "There's two of them," and I got hooked, and then I got introduced to Bret Hart, who at the time was a bad guy, which I didn't ever realize that he was for the longest time in the early '90s. At that time, he was a good guy. So he's Bret Hart. He's running down America with his brothers, and he's fighting this guy by the name of Stone Cold Steve Austin, who I was completely just flabbergasted by what I saw. I mean, Stone Cold, well, Booker T was like my Metallica, Stone Cold was like my Slayer. Whereas, like, wow, that's something way different than what I'm seeing here. There's this guy, and I have a brother who is significantly older than me. He's 14 years older, which is a pretty big age gap. And every weekend I would go to. He was living at my grandma's house at the time. I'd go over to her house and spend the weekend with him, and we had a mutual friend. Or he had a friend, I should say, who was now a mutual friend of mine, who was huge into wrestling. He'd come over all the time. We'd play video games or what have you. And I mentioned wrestling to my brother, who was a huge Hogan fan, but that was really about it. He liked other stuff, but he was all about the Hulkster.
Hulkamania's running worldwide, and it just turns me on, me, Gene.
this other guy, his friend that he had was he traded tapes. Something that internet existed, but it wasn't readily available like it is in this day and age. So trading tapes was something that you would do, and he introduced me to all these other promotions and all these other older tapes that he had traded or he had collected over the years. And I got to see Ric Flair wrestle for the first time. I got to see Sting wrestle for the first time, who became my all-time favorite worker, Sting. And it was one of those things that was the first thing that I have ever watched or ever got introduced to, that I became such a fanatic so quickly that I became like an encyclopedia where I just wanted to absorb more and more and more. And that's the reason why to this day I continue to watch, because let's face it, there's times when the product is really bad and there's times when the product is really good. But from my experiences throughout the years of watching it, I know that if you tough out the bad times, you're gonna get the good moments, that kind of what we're getting now, and that we'll probably talk about later on. But you asked the question of the match, like what did it for you? To me, it was WrestleMania 13. It was Austin versus Hart in the submission match, the match in which Austin never tapped out.
Austin will not surrender. He will not submit. Bret Hart has beaten every superstar in the WWF with this move. How in the hell Austin has not given up, I can't understand. Ken Shamrock stopping it right now. That's it. Stone Cold Steve Austin. Austin had it out. Austin is unconscious. Austin never gave up. Austin never gave up.
But yeah, that was my first standout match, because you had this great storyline between these two guys, and then the actual match itself delivered. And I'm glad that I was introduced by the right people, because even at a young age, I realized, and it's also too because times were changing too at that point, where wrestling had your gimmicks, and gimmicks existed, and you needed characters, you needed gimmicks, but the overall match needs to deliver, or everything that you're doing doesn't exist, or doesn't matter, I should say. But yeah, that's my backstory on why wrestling, and it's just it started with a kid with nothing to do and nothing to watch on TV, and right place, right time for me.
Interesting. I'm not gonna lie, I did a lot of channel surfing when I was little. We were one of the only people on my block that had cable. And for those of you who don't know, there was a point in time where cable television, if it got unplugged or shut off, there was usually like an 8 to 14 hour wait time for it to come back on. That's how bad the signal was delayed. But we had cable, and we were also lucky enough to live in such a market where a lot of regular television stations we were able to get with an antenna. And what first caught my eye were two gigantic men with face paint called the Road Warriors. I got to see them wrestle in Jim Crockett's NWA promotion, and they were huge, they were massive, they were very intimidating, and the best part, they were from Chicago. And I was like, this is great. So I got to watch them go into this dingy little studio and proceed to wreak havoc during a few squash matches. For those of you who don't know what squash match is, where one person or one team in the match just basically dominates the other person or the other team, and it's done on purpose just to show that they have they have a certain skill, or they're supposed to be intimidating, something like that. But yeah, I got to watch the Road Warriors just demolish people for a couple weeks, and I was hooked. I was like, I have to have more of these guys, and let's see what else there is. And at the time, I had access to NWA, which was the Crockett promotion on WTBS, which is a Turner network, or was a Turner network. And then without cable, I was able to watch World Class Championship Wrestling out of Texas with the Von Erich family. That was shown on a local Chicago station. So I got to watch a little bit of that. And then, of course, WWF. There was always Saturday Morning Superstars, which I watched a lot of. And that's just all squash matches, basically. But yeah, after seeing the Road Warriors, I was hooked, line, and sinker. I wanted more. I wanted to watch all the wrestling there was, and I couldn't get enough of it. And as much as I wanted to watch it, believe it or not, I got sick and tired of it, and I quit watching in '93. And I went most of '93, all in '94, and then I got back into it early '95, and that was doing part to my godfather. He got me back into watching wrestling a second time, and I've been hooked ever since, one way or another. Even if the product is bad, I'm still asking people like what they thought of it, and you know who's out there and things like that. So that's my story.
So, well, like, what kept you? You talked about your frustration, or you turned away from wrestling for those 2 years. You said your uncle brought you back, but what was it that brought you back?
It was a mixture of stuff. Probably the biggest, the most eye-catching thing was Stone Cold Steve Austin. I got wind of Stone Cold right as he became Stone Cold. I actually got to watch 2 or 3 matches, like the last 2 or 3 matches that were televised of him being the ringmaster. And I actually used that as an argument against my uncle. I was like, this is why I stopped watching this shit. And back then I had a lot more respect for my uncle, but I didn't say shit to him. But I was like, I don't watch this crap because of stuff like this. You know, like this guy's clearly capable of being so much more.
Right.
And then he cut the promo at King of the Ring, and I got to see it, and I'm like, oh man.
Yeah.
That's what I was waiting for. This guy's going to be great. And then at the same time, my uncle got a hold of tapes. He was trading tapes with a guy at work, and he got a hold of some very early ECW stuff. And I got to see more than a handful of promos that Terry Funk had cut for the company. Excellent. Yeah. And I was shocked to see Terry Funk in such an extreme setting. Mm-hmm. At that point in time, I didn't have access to many tapes outside of what we recorded, here on my end of the spectrum. But he had already been involved in stuff in Japan and stuff, but I didn't get to see any of that, so I had no idea that existed. And for Terry Funk to show up there and not only speak so highly of the promotion, but just cut really good promos, really good interviews, I was like, I'm definitely intrigued.
Now you're back.
So, yeah. Now I gotta find out everything there is to know about ECW. And I just, again, I became a sponge again. And I
Yeah.
absorbed anything and everything that came my way.
Now, I mentioned him because he was that it guy, or at least becoming that when I first started really watching it. You mentioned it, and I know you were not in your head. So, like, you talk about Stone Cold, and you hear about him, obviously, on a lot of these interviews, that how important he was, how important that King of the Ring promo was. But, like, from three fans' perspectives who were probably in three different spots as far as wrestling fandom goes, how important was Stone Cold Steve Austin to pro wrestling as a whole?
You want to start this one?
I would love to.
Please.
Earlier, Big Man, you talked about, walking away for a few years. I also did. During that time for me, I think I was just kind of bored with it.
Yeah.
I knew, I like Shawn Michaels, I love Bret Hart, but and Undertaker, but it just wasn't enough for me.
Yeah, no.
And, at that time, my body was changing, and I started liking girls more. And, I wanted to play in the metal bands, and so that's where I was at. I was starting to work and everything. So on Saturday nights, I'd get off at 11 p.m., and I'd get home, and I did not have cable. I'd have to go to my grandma's or a friend's house to watch. Well, when I got back into wrestling, I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry, but I would come home, and they would have Shotgun Saturday Nights, which it was on regular TV, so I was able to watch that. And they would have some matches like in this little bar area thing, and Stone Cold was running a promo, but before he came out, I didn't know who the hell he was. They were running some promos where he's talking shit about Bret Hart, and he's cussing, and I'm just like, who the hell is this guy saying this shit about Bret Hart? Like, who the fuck is he? It blew me away, and I was like, I like this guy, and I'm like, but being an older wrestling fan, or a kid of the '80s, I don't know if I should like him because he clearly seems like a bad guy. But being a vulgar little bastard that I was, I enjoyed it. But I was also kind of like, who do I cheer for? Because I love the Hitman, but this new guy, man, he's something else, and he's got fucking balls that I've never seen before. So, lo and behold, I gotta have friends tape Raw for me, and then eventually my grandma did us a huge service. Every Monday night, me and my brother would go over to Grandma's house, and in the living room, my brother would be recording Raw, and I'd be in the back bedroom recording Nitro, and we were going back and forth. It's a school night, but it was so cool that we were able to break the rules of going to bed early, and tape this stuff and watch it and just be all about it, and just, just like when we were younger, we're doing the moves on each other and jumping off his shit, and, except it was a little more serious the second time around because we're older now. But I would have to thank Stone Cold for bringing me back to wrestling, and it totally happened inadvertently. And I was even showing my brother. I was like, dude, Joe, you gotta check this guy out. And my brother became probably the biggest Stone Cold fan I've ever known in my life. But yeah, and then, obviously greater things, the NWO and all stuff like that. But when I started watching WCW again, back in the day, I knew who Sting and Lex Luger were.
That's
but
okay, you can say Loogie.
That's kind of what he looks like now. As a loogie. Anyway.
Poor Lex.
Yeah, he looks like a loogie dripping down in a chair. Anyways, sorry. So I was behind on the NWO stuff, but quickly got brought up to speed and everything, thankfully, to people having tapes. But yeah, it was so great, it was so fresh, and a lot of these older faces, that you grew up and you loved, and you're seeing them do things a little bit differently, and now all of a sudden there isn't such a thing as good guys and bad guys anymore. It was all point of view. And, even being a teenager, there were still times it's like, I'm kind of divided here. I don't know, who I want to win.
Yeah.
But it was just a great time, and wrestling had life breathed back into it. And yeah, I've been hooked again ever since. Feel the same way as you guys. I'll always keep watching, no matter how good or bad. But Matt, I think you said it best: is that when the payoff comes, it's totally worth it then. And then they jag you for a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean,
you're waiting for the payoff again.
We've been around long enough to where we know that when it's good, and that's just because we love the business. We love wrestling, and that's why we're doing what we're doing right now, to share that love and passion for it. So when it's crap, we will call it crap, and we may not be as intense when it comes to watching it, but we definitely keep up with it because at least enough to where we know, okay, well, now we need to watch it. Now if it's like, for example, if it's WrestleMania season, we know we should start watching a little bit more because something usually happens. I kind of felt a little gypped this year personally, but in general, it's usually a good time of year to watch. And I think too, you mentioned WWE or WWF and then WCW, which was awesome because my sister and I did the same thing. I would watch Nitro, she'd have Raw on, and we would run back and forth. She was into wrestling for probably about 6 months, so we did this for 6 months every Monday, back and forth, until I did it by myself. Because she was too cool to like wrestling, and I was a little kid that was infatuated by it. But to have two promotions that were at the time killing it in all the right ways, and then again going back to my tape trading friend that would give me ECW stuff, he would give me New Japan stuff. I had all this wrestling. And you had, so even if Nitro had a bad night, you still had Raw, you still had ECW, you still had whatever else you can get your hands on. And that's the same applies for today's wrestling, where you have all these different organizations. So even if you're frustrated with the WWE product, which I am so on it right now, there's so much other stuff out there that you can watch. So you can continue to be a WWE fan, but because I just love wrestling altogether, I can watch New Japan, I can watch Ring of Honor, I can watch whatever other promotions out there, and so like that's kind of what I dig about it. I know I'm going off topic, but that's we brought up the Raw and the Raw Nitro. That's just what I'm hearing out of it. But I want to go back to you, Joe, on the topic of Stone Cold.
Why was he so important?
Yeah.
I tell you what, watching him as the ringmaster was, at that point I had watched enough wrestling to know, look, clearly he's not happy with what he's doing, and he's just kind of going through the motions. And I remember bits and pieces of him when he was in WCW as Stunning Steve Austin, and I was familiar with him being a really good technical wrestler, and to watch him as the ringmaster, paled in comparison to what he was as Stunning Steve Austin. You could tell like he was being held back or something. Something was off, and he just wasn't the same wrestler. And looking back at it now, I still wonder, I wonder really what changed. I mean, obviously we can find interviews and shit now, but
yeah,
back then I just wrote it off as he's probably unhappy. And I got into it with my uncle, and I'm like, this is why I stopped watching this stuff. Don't get me wrong, I like the $1 Million Belt. It's cool, but yeah, just being DiBiase's stooge, basically, going out and doing his dirty work.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I could give two shits. I could care less. But Then he does the King of the Ring, and he cuts that promo. And what got me about, and to me why that promo is so important, is because of the way he did it. Whether it was planned or not, it came across as very much unplanned. You still had Jake the Snake trying to recover. He was still reeling from getting his ass beat, and Stone Cold's off to the side doing this interview with Michael Hayes, I believe.
Yeah.
And it was just real. It felt very real. You could tell all that angst and frustration was coming out, and he just like let loose. And I was like, holy crap.
The first thing I want to be done is to get that piece of crap out of my ring. Don't just get him out of the ring, get him out of the WWF. Because I've proved, son, without a shadow of a doubt, you ain't got what it takes anymore. You sit there and you thump your Bible and you say your prayers, and it didn't get you anywhere. Talk about your Psalms, talk about John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says I just whipped your ass.
I still feel like that was probably one of the realest moments in wrestling at the time. Like, he probably wasn't supposed to say everything he said. Even if it was planned, it came across as a shoot. And I was like, this is great. Like, let him do that from now on, And they did. They eventually got smart to it and like, yeah, this works. Let's just let him be himself. Just amplify it up to 15 instead of 10. So, and obviously it worked. So,
I think a lot of it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, a lot of it is Stone Cold was that character. I shouldn't use character, but I'll use it for
persona.
Yeah, persona that broke that mold from gimmick to realistic wrestling.
Yeah, because like I said, he beat the crap out of Jake the Snake, and Jake the Snake is just still hurting pretty bad, and he's got his snakeskin wrestling boots on, he's got the garb on, the whole nine. And the moment he cut that promo, if he didn't look silly before, he sure as hell looks silly now as we watch Kamala on the television. Yeah, it just seemed all too silly. Like, you know what? That you hit it on the head. After that promo, there was a lot of stuff that just seemed so outlandish.
Yeah.
It was just plain straight up silly and useless. And for him to do that with a few minutes of time, kill all that, any momentum that product had, and then just basically suck it all up and use it against itself. It was great. It was so great.
Because you saw shortly after that how the tide had changed, especially in WWF, because WCW was kind of already in that mentality. This is already post Dungeon of Doom WCW. So, you saw, you look at characters that were already there, and you look at Shawn Michaels. He was no longer, and I know he wasn't necessarily the pretty boy persona then, but it was definitely screw it, we're gonna do a whole different Shawn Michaels. Undertaker changed. Undertaker got a lot darker.
Yeah.
Right after that, he was already a dark character. After you see Undertaker come out now, but you just saw this whole other thing. Without that drop of gimmicks, I don't know if they would have had the courage to do what they did with Undertaker, with crucifixions and all that other stuff. So. Yeah, I think that's why Stone Cold for me always goes down as one of my top 5 favorites, because he changed the wrestling that we see today. He was a major part of.
I'm gonna go off on a tangent here. What year SummerSlam is this?
This is '92 that we're watching.
So we're watching WWF SummerSlam 1992. Undertaker's coming to the ring in some sort of hearse.
Yeah, it's a hearse.
You know how you you'll see action figures marketed with like vehicles and shit. You know, obviously Spider-Man doesn't need a motorcycle, but you'll find them at the toy store with motorcycle. Superman, does Superman really need a fucking helicopter? No, but he probably's got one somewhere. You know, out of all the shit I've seen over the years, I'm just catching up to this now. But why was Undertaker never marketed with a hearse? That would have been fucking great. That's one vehicle that makes sense for his action figure. Yeah, he's a wrestler, but dude, he's the Undertaker.
Absolutely, it's like
Holy
the Ghostbusters.
shit.
It's like the Ghostbusters have an Ecto-1.
Exactly.
And dude, you hit the nail right on the head.
Damn it! Someone owes me some fucking royalties.
Now they're gonna come up with a Legends line, and it's
Yeah.
gonna be him on the hearse.
But then they'll
You're
give,
welcome, Vince.
What? Edit this.
But then they'll give other legends like senseless automobiles.
Yeah.
Like JBL will have his. Well, that one might.
That one made sense a little
The
bit.
one with the fucking
The
bullhorns.
horns, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. But yeah, that was my little.
That's a shoulda, woulda, coulda right there.
Shoulda, woulda, coulda. Yeah, Stone Cold, super fucking important. And but you know what? That he wasn't the only one that kept me watching. Like I said, I was in the ECW. Whatever I could get my hands on. I mean, seeing Sandman and Raven, and,
yes.
Tommy Dreamer, Taz. Man, that was such a huge fucking Taz mark. But and Sabu. Oh God, how can I talk about fucking Terry Funk and ECW and not mention Sabu? That one of the first bits of video I saw with Sabu was when he had a barbed wire match with Terry Funk, and I saw the footage of him super gluing his wounds shut just so that he could continue the match. I think that speaks volumes about just how faithful you are to your job, because shit, I mean, that was some wild shit back then, right? At that point in time, that was probably some of the craziest shit I had ever seen, and that was just one match off of a card, you know. So, yeah, definitely, other shit kept me watching, and like they said, they're not the only ones. I still keep abreast of everything. I'm watching a lot of wrestling now, especially with my little one, and she's all about it. She loves the Bullet Club, by the way, and she can't stand Kenny Omega. She loves Cody Rhodes. She thinks he's the rightful leader of the Bullet Club there.
Hey, remember, Cody doesn't have a last name.
Yeah,
according to JR.
You're right. My bad. Kayfabe.
Yeah, it's that's a youth thing to not like Kenny Omega at this day and age. To me, it's like the equivalent of disliking Hogan in the 80s. Only I feel like I would be that kid still. And I know I've talked about to you about this when we've met before. I look just because I brought up Hogan. I have to say, this is just a disclaimer for me as a type of wrestling fan that I hope I would have been at that era. I like to believe, and again, I'll never know this, that even in that era, if I grew up in the same era you did, that I would be the Macho Man fan that I am today. You know, when in comparison to Hogan, that I wouldn't get sucked into Hulkamania because I could never get it. I've had you guys explain it to me. I've had my brother explain it to me. I've had a guy who grew up in that era and disliking Hogan still explain it to me. And it's like I can't fathom that idea of being behind Hogan, because the thing is, I understand he never had squash matches, but I still feel he kind of did, because every match was the same exact thing. Even if it was a 10-minute or 15-minute match, it was he was going to get beat up, and then he was going to like have a seizure in the ring, and then he was untouchable. And that was a Hogan match in a nutshell. But then I watch some of the stuff he did in Japan, and I was like, why couldn't that Hogan have come here? You can still be your American superhero or whatever. Because, you mentioned Superman. Like, Hulk Hogan was the Superman of pro wrestling. He was a man with too many powers.
He was. I mean, he was just Superman in general.
Yeah.
He was like pop culture Superman.
Yeah, and I felt that you could still wrestle guys and put on good matches and still do your say your vitamins or say your prayers and eat your vitamins and rip your shirt off.
Train, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, be true to yourself, true to your country, be a real American. Whew.
And do all that and still put on at least a decent match. And I'm not trying to bash Hogan because life has already done that for him. But I would like to still feel that even in the 80s, I would have been a Macho Man fan. I would have been. I know they were in the same promotion, but I would have been more of a Ric Flair fan than Hogan. But that's just wishful thinking. I have to say that's the reason why I this type of wrestling fan that I am. I've always been anti-Hogan. The only time that I ever tolerated Hogan was when Bash at the Beach '96 when he turned his back on the yellow and red and joined the NWO. So
Was selling out the world, brother, while they were bumming gas to put in their car to get to high school.
I know where you're coming from, but I still think you would have been sucked in. I really do.
I feel that it probably would have been
because I keep in mind I had access to like at least 3 different organizations at any given time, and I was still a huge Hogan mark, and I got to watch a lot of Ric Flair.
Yeah,
because I wasn't just watching him in NWA; I was watching him in World Class.
Yeah, some great matches against Von Erichs.
Yeah, and so I've always been a fan of technical wrestling, and obviously Hogan is not any of that. Like, you're not going to see that from Hogan. You're just not. That's not what he's about. But you couldn't help it. And I also want to say that I was also a Macho Man fan. Like, we talked about WrestleMania 3 the other day.
Yeah.
The big draw, they were selling that pay-per-view as Hogan versus Andre. And by far that was their big marketing scheme. But Steamboat and Savage stole that show. And me being as young as I was watching that, I knew that, like, that was a better match.
Yeah.
And did it make me any less of a Hogan mark? No. Oh my God, it was still so fucking cool to see him slam Andre. Well, but did it make me more of a fan of Savage and Steamboat? Of course. Oh my God, those guys put on a fucking clinic and a half. And anybody who will tell you otherwise, like, they're just biased, that they're too much of a Hulk Hogan fan. They just are, because I mean that was a fucking piece of classic wrestling right there between Steamboat and Savage.
Matt, I do have a question for you.
And what you gonna do?
That is part 2 of the question.
He's a huge Hogan fan, so I knew this was coming.
My question is this. Okay, so the big man and I, our answers are pretty similar on the whole Hogan thing.
Yes.
Countless other people I know, and I know you know, have answered pretty similar too.
Yes.
Now, was your brother and your brother's friend, the mutual friend you guys have, were their answers similar?
Oh yeah, exactly. They were all pretty much identical.
Okay.
My brother grew up. He was born in the '70s, so he was when Hulkamania took off in '83. He was about 8 years old. I believe that was the year Hulkamania took off. And it was that age. I mean, he was at that impressionable age where it's like, this guy is like, I don't want to use. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's fair to say he was like a god because he was in that era. He was the guy, and for him also too, to knock off a Middle Eastern man in the Iron Sheik for that first title, it was a huge deal as well for political reasons. He was indeed the American hero, the all-American hero. The mutual friend that we had was not a Hogan fan, but he respected Hogan for what he was. Even to this day, he respects Hogan for what he was, or what he is, I guess. But yeah, the answers were exactly the same. I mean, it was just this was also too, a wrestling was more of a, and I get you guys now, and I don't mean to be disrespectful and call you guys old, but you guys were older than me, so you guys were around during this time where Hogan was more of a wrestling as a whole was, I would imagine, was more of a household thing. It was definitely more impactful than what it is now. I mean, if you're taking over a Saturday Night Live time slot once a month, you got to be doing something right.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Compared to now, I mean, it's huge now, but amongst your core fans, I mean, everyone's kind of identified either you're a wrestling fan or you're not, for the most part. It was a cultural thing. It was just, and so it makes sense. It makes sense. But my thing was just like, I get that, but you could put Randy Savage in that spot, and he could be the All-American Hero too, but better. That's the way I've always looked at it. I mean, you could put, I don't want to say anybody, but you could put a lot of other guys in that spot.
I don't know about Savage. Maybe if he changed his gimmick a little bit, because he was too high strung to be an American Hero for me anyway. Like,
yeah.
He was always on edge. You know, like he had eaten fucking like 16 bags of coffee before he walked out.
That's very true.
That's
very true.
Scared the shit out of kids.
Oh yeah.
I'm talking about all the way to the top, yeah. Unjustifiably in a position that I'd rather not be in, but the cream will rise to the top.
You had a good time. It's like sitting on Santa Claus's lap, and then you look up and Santa Claus is wearing a Michael Myers mask.
Yeah, no, I don't know about Savage being as big as Hogan, but yeah.
Well, let me ask you this then. Hogan, that character, or just that, I guess that character, that guy, does he work anywhere else? Or does it have to be WWF? The way that they pushed gimmicks more so than, really it seems anybody pushed gimmicks. Even during a time where gimmicks weren't as adamant as they were towards the later 80s, going into the 90s.
I think no. I think he doesn't work anywhere else but WWF. And the reason being, I mean, obviously you had other federations out there, organizations that, played up the whole Cold War angle where they were always fighting Russians. You know, I think everybody had Russians one way or another, and they were all heels, at least until I think probably Nikita Koloff turned babyface. But
yeah, to help out Sting. Yeah.
But I don't think it would work because they just didn't have the national platform that WWF had, and I think that helped a lot. And the whole, they had a better grip of pop culture. You know, they had Cyndi Lauper, they had celebrities come to WrestleMania, Mr. T. You know, they didn't have that. You didn't get that with NWA. You know, you didn't get that with World Class. Like they were much more regional. You know, they weren't on a national level per se, and I think that's unfortunately what hurt them in the end was stuff like that. I mean, it's not like they didn't have the talent. I mean, fucking the Crockett Promotions had like all the fucking talent.
Oh yeah,
you know, they were stacked to the gills, and even when they did pay-per-views and big shows, there was none of that. It wasn't. Yeah, they had Russian guys. Was it all the Russian contingency against one guy for the sake of the country? No, it was the Russians coming to beat up the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. But Dusty Rhodes is no Hulk Hogan, and it was never going to be that way. So I don't know whether you chalk that all up to just not enough business vision, like foresight, or what the deal is. But yeah, to me, Hogan wouldn't have worked anywhere else.
Well, think about it like this too. I mean, I know Hulkamania already ran wild before he went to WCW, but then when he tried it in WCW, it's cool to see him there, no doubt. But it wasn't. Damn right, it wasn't the same. It didn't have the same effect. So, yeah, that's why I chimed in and said that.
Yeah, he came. Obviously that's why they signed him.
Well, he's definitely a draw now.
He had, he was a draw. He had all that notoriety. Why not sign him?
You're gonna draw him, and then you're gonna go head to head on Monday nights. I mean, that's good business.
Yeah, it was just a good business deal, and obviously it wasn't the same thing the second time around. But also, again, here you have WCW, who is just not as big as WWF. Let's face it. I mean, they were the more substantial product, and it didn't work. They were too regional. They were for all intent and purposes, they were a southern-based promotion.
Oh yeah,
out of Atlanta, and that's what you got. You got a lot of don't get me wrong, they had a big following down south, but it was nothing like up north. They didn't have a big New York presence. I remember reading in Pro Wrestling Illustrated where there would be Crockett shows, NWA shows run, like big shows in the Nassau Coliseum in New York. And that was a big, pretty important venue in the way of territories. And there was more than a handful of times where they fucked up ticket sales. Like they either oversold it, or they, there was problems with ticketing in general. And then you'd have like dates being messed up on the tickets, so these people would show up for a show that wasn't around.
Oh, that's horrible.
Things like that, and you can't have a Hulk Hogan pulling bullshit like that.
Yeah.
You just can't. It doesn't work.
I think my other huge gripe, and it's probably the biggest gripe out of them all, and it's really more just the promotion. It's more of WWF, but because of Hogan and who I feel is this half-assed wrestler, guys like Piper, guys like Kurt Hennig in the early '90s, like they get overlooked. As great as they were, I mean, you put those guys, you put Kurt Hennig against the Brooklyn Brawler, he's going to have a better match than Hogan's going to have against anybody, because it's Kurt Hennig. If you don't know who Kurt Hennig is, look him up. You
shouldn't be listening to this show.
I mean, he was exactly his name. He was definitely Mr. Perfect in that ring.
Hennig was another one that was another one I used to watch too, was AWA.
Mm-hmm.
And Hennig definitely was a better technical wrestler and a better worker in AWA than he was in WWF. And if you liked him in WWF, man, you should go back and watch his AWA
Oh,
stuff.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because like that was what I was going to segue to next, was that whole idea of wrestling in WWE and compared to wrestling outside of in other promotions, and you see it all the time, and that's a perfect example of where Kurt Hennig is. Now I want to say was watered down, but compared to what he was doing in AWA, like you mentioned, was fairly much watered down, and that's something that continues nowadays. And a quick comment is the reason why I segue to this was because I think that's the reason why a lot of people, even to this day, still have resentment towards John Cena, because he is the present day equivalent of Hulk Hogan. He is the today's superhero who,
unfortunately,
quite honestly, let's face it, is at the same, has the same type of persona as Hogan.
It's a different climate, and that's why I don't like John Cena. Like, clearly he's, for all intent and purposes, he's Hulk Hogan, but To me, it doesn't work because
if you were,
it's not the same climate. If John Cena if they had like members of ISIS instead of Russian wrestlers, and then John Cena played up the angle that he was the biggest American or whatever, guess what? I bet it fucking works better than what he's doing now.
Yeah.
You know?
So if you were, an 8-year-old kid, would you be a John Cena fan? Would it be the same feel to you? I mean, I'm trying to put you in that mindset because that's
I still say no, and because we don't have. It isn't the same cultural climate as what happened with Hulk Hogan.
Is it just the
because again, this was Hulk Hogan, the real American.
Yeah.
And what was America doing at the time? Taking part in the Cold War. That was always a constant thing.
Mm.
And so whether the Russians whether he was fighting the Russians or not, anybody who was seen as international at that point went up against Hulk Hogan. It already took the current climate, social climate, and elevated it. And it caused his character to have a more profound effect on people. These days, again, I think the only way that works with Cena is if, one, he got rid of the fucking I don't know what you want to call it, but I don't want to say the rapper or the thug or whatever he wants to call it, however you want to refer to it. Get rid of that, have him come in and just be all about the troops, because let's face it, that's kind of what he does these days. He's all about the troops and Make-A-Wish. Have him be that wholesome as possible. Have him be that wrestler, just that. And then pit him against, man, I'm probably going to get a lot of heat for this, but fucking Korean wrestlers. And Middle Eastern wrestlers that are supposed to be mimicking whatever your stereotypical ISIS person is supposed to be like. Because let's face it, there's a lot of people who think ISIS is just Middle Eastern people, and that's not the case these days. But yeah, you would have to pit him against something like that in order for him to have the same effect on me now as Hulk Hogan did back then. Because whether I want to admit it or not, that's what Hulk Hogan was. I mean, that's how everybody saw it. Like Mr. Wrestling 6 over here said earlier, he gave you that sense of everything's going to be okay. Hogan's going to come down here, he's going to beat some ass no matter who it is. And, is he going to get hurt doing it? Probably. But he comes back and he always wins. And it gave you that reassurance. Everything's going to be okay. I don't see that with Cena. I don't see that one bit. I can't stand John Cena.
There's no cloud of comfort with John Cena.
No, there's not. No amount of thugonomics can comfort me in my current state.
Well, it's just, I think it's because wrestling is so real now. Sometimes we don't know if, hey, is this a storyline or is this really real? Are these people married? Are these people really fighting backstage? And there's a lot of people who just hate just to hate. And I mean, but back then, I can't remember anybody. I mean, yeah, I was a little kid, but I can't remember anybody ever saying they hated Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, no one hated Hulk Hogan. No one, other than the people wrestling him.
I can't. Yeah, I don't ever remember somebody telling me that they want Sid Justice to fucking beat Hulk Hogan.
Right. Yeah, no one wanted to see King Kong Bundy beat Hulk Hogan.
It's the times, man. It's I guess it's all your point of view now.
I mean, I remember when Don Morocco was holding Hogan in the corner, and King Kong Bundy was continually giving him like the big splash, and they broke his ribs. And I was completely fucking bent out of shape. I was like, I can't fucking believe this is going on. This is crap. Like, they're hurting Hulk Hogan. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. It was real. You know?
Yeah, and plus the way nowadays that I talked about it being very real, that the way people call Cena out, like, whether that stuff is true or not,
yeah,
they've called him out on, you know, these things. Back then, that didn't happen.
Yeah, it just didn't. It didn't happen. Completely. Yeah.
I think a lot of it, too, is that, you know, the way the world is, not a lot of people give a fuck anymore, and they just say whatever. And I'm sure there's been some wrestlers that have gotten their fucking hand slapped for saying whatever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It seems, too, this day and age, the fourth wall has definitely been broken in pro wrestling, and that line between kayfabe and real has been broken on one too many occasions. So, yeah, I can definitely see John Cena not being the same thing, but I still look at him as the closest equivalent to the Hogan era, just because the way that he has run over so many top tier talents, and again, it's the same thing, because John Cena has been champion so many times for so long. Other guys were passed up because of it, and that's the same reason why I looked at Hogan, like, because he was champion, especially from '83 to, I think, was it '88 when he lost the title to Andre, and then it became vacant. During that 5-year span, you know, there was plenty of guys that could have been champion. You didn't need a 5-year championship reign. And I know that was wrestling back then. I mean, that was a short reign compared to, like, Bruno Sammartino and,
yeah, oh god,
you know, and Lou Thesz with the NWA title,
right,
held it for almost a decade, I believe. So I just that's my biggest resentment for those two, and it's never a hate thing, because Hulk Hogan.
People paying money to see me in a 20-by-20 ring.
Fuck. Yeah. I don't know. I don't understand why the Warrior did half the shit he did. I'll never forget, though, growing up, I don't know if you guys remember this, but he had, he didn't get in trouble, or he got in trouble, like, late after, like, way after the fact. But he was, what he was doing was basically taking people's money, because he was too busy being the Warrior and not fulfilling what he was promising. And he had this, like, you would send away for this fucking Ultimate Warrior, like fucking Warrior's kit or some shit, and it was like, it came with like protein and like armbands and like a few weights, and like you were supposed to be able to like work out, like, almost like what DDP yoga is now, but like way back, a very fucking simple and, you know, just not well put together deal. And he was charging like $100-$200 a pop, and apparently people were sending him money. And then what he would do was, like, because he couldn't keep up with the schedule of his own business,